Hi, welcome to Loving Tech Life. Today we're doing something a little different, diving into the world of retro tech and sitting down for an interview with Ludo, also known as Djcalle, a CRT preservationist, retro gaming enthusiast, and Sega fanboy extraordinaire. In this interview, we'll dive deep into the world of CRT technology and discover why these displays still hold a special place in the hearts of gaming enthusiasts. Ludo shares his passion for Loewe TVs, premium German CRTs with distinctive qualities that set them apart from Sony and other brands. The highlight of our conversation is Ludo's groundbreaking work developing VGA clone cards that breathe new life into once discarded Loewe 100Hz TVs, transforming them into perfect displays for 480p content from systems like the Dreamcast. We'll also get an exclusive first look at his newest creation, a VGA card for the older Q23 Loewe chassis, extending his preservation efforts to even more vintage displays. I've included timestamps for all the different sections of the interview in the description below, so you can easily jump to the parts you're most interested in if you don't want to watch the whole thing. So whether you're a dedicated CRT collector or just curious about retro gaming on original hardware, this interview has something for everyone. With that said, let's get into it. So I'm lucky enough to be here today with a very good friend of mine. You might know him as Ludo or Djcalle. He is a CRT preservationist, retro gaming enthusiast, big Sega fanboy, and all-around good guy. Ludo, thank you for having us in your house today. Really appreciate it. We're going to have a good general broad conversation about a lot of different things, including CRTs and arcades and some other projects that you've run, but really appreciate it.
Thanks, David, and thanks for coming over and having me on your show. Congratulations on the YouTube channel. You've done fantastic so far, so I'm honored. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's all right. That's quite all right. Well, we'll pretty much get straight into it. So for those that are unfamiliar with CRT technology, why are people like ourselves so passionate? What do you think people like ourselves are so passionate about it today?
Right. Well, there's a mix of nostalgia, obviously, but if you look at objective reasons, you could say motion clarity. The way the picture is drawn is completely different, right? So you get a big glass tube with phosphors that are being shot by electron guns, which is crazy if you think about it, right? And the way the picture is drawn gives an effect that is completely different to what you see on modern displays. So that is one reason. Then it gives a very clear motion. Motion clarity is very specific. It looks very specific on a CRT, and you won't have that even with modern OLEDs. Then you have those signals called 480i and 240p, and those two, they are quite special because 480i is interlaced and is displaying one line like this, so it's going like this and like this. That's broadcast TV, right? And you have some later consoles that use 480i, but if you had 480i content, like back in 10 years ago, I rewatched The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and that was only shot in video, which was 480i. You try to watch this on an OLED, it de-interlaces the picture, it doesn't look quite right. So I put that on a CRT and it looked 10 times better. Really, so you have home video from back then, shot in VHS or High 8 or even mini DV, that looked better. Not the interlaced, right?
Standard CRT.
And then you have the mighty 240p, which is a trick where basically they're using the same bandwidth of 15 kilohertz of that SD signal, and they're blanking half of the lines, right? To have a signal that is not interlaced. And this is what gives your NES, your Sega Master System, Mega Drive, blocky render and rock solid picture. And those pictures, those signals are really special, and I think why people love CRTs. Of course, you have HD CRTs, and there's other reasons, but I think to me those are the core reasons.
It kind of comes back to retro gaming, right? You know, if you have a retro console of that era, it's really designed to be plugged into that type of display. You know, so that kind of segues into my next question. You know, when you try and plug these consoles made for these displays that have 15 kilohertz, 240p, and you try and plug them into LCDs, obviously you get, you know, a different result. You know, what are really the high level main advantages of a CRT? You know, if you were going to get one today, you have to go out of your way to get one. What are the main advantages of a CRT over any LCD technology that you've had historically and even today?
Right. So obviously there was motion clarity. That's always going to be one, but lag is the big one.
Yeah.
That any modern display is going to have some lag. You're going to have an upscaler of some sort. You can use external upscalers, but yeah, lag, motion clarity, those are two big ones.
Yeah. And I guess as well that within a certain degree, it's a bit maybe cheaper, not on space or real estate, but it's cheaper to pick up a CRT than it can be to go to all the trouble of like what you need to do to get it working
and if
on a modern display, right?
If you're driven purely by nostalgia and being original, you'd be happy with just a crappy CRT like most people had.
Yes.
And with composite or even RF. And some of the CRT enthusiasts, they draw the line there, or not draw the line, but their own line. That's why they're happy with that, because that's what they had as children. A lot of us then go crazy, go RGB, go with the best thing, modify the consoles to get an experience that is unrealistic.
Yes.
That none of us had back then.
Yes. But it's nice to have because you can have it.
That's
right.
fine.
You know, everyone wants it because you can.
Exactly.
Sort of thing. Cool. All right. Well, you know, getting a bit more into your passion and your work specifically. Was there a particular moment or experience you had where it kind of sparked your passion again for CRTs? Because obviously there was a time where CRTs were all that we had, and that's whatever. We all move on, jump to different technologies, jump to whatever's current. Go from this to I'll have a plasma or an LCD and whatever you have today. Was there a moment later on where CRTs were already a thing of the past, right? But you obviously must have something triggered at some point in time.
Yeah, and the story is almost the same for everybody. You get one of your retro consoles, you plug it in on an LCD, or I had a plasma at the time. It looks horrible, and you're trying to figure out why, and then it leads you to a CRT.
Yes.
So my story is, at the time, it was a summer night, and my ex at the time gets a call from her mother and says, I have this box of old shit. I'm getting rid of it. And turns out it was Japanese consoles, because her brother-in-law was in the 90s bringing back consoles straight from Japan. And so she grew up not with Nintendo, she grew up with a Turbo Duo. That's what her and family had in New Zealand and then in Australia. And so I jumped on it and said, no, that doesn't belong in the bin. We need to rescue that for one reason or another. So I'm ending up with a collection of games and a PC Engine Turbo Duo, the blue one or the purple one, and Japanese Saturn. Then I'm plugging this in plasma, and it looks horrible.
Yeah, like
completely
RCA.
in RCA, yeah, completely horrible. And that summer night, I saw hard rubbish downstairs.
What did you think at the time? You're like, the graphics must have been really bad. Way worse than I remember. Something's not quite right
I'm
here.
nerdy enough to know that it was, I knew that it was something about composite, and you know, I kind of knew that it was, and I instantly thought about CRTs. But what was cool is that it was a summer night with hard rubbish of third floor apartment without lifts, and I had seen a CRT downstairs.
So for those that don't live in Melbourne, or maybe in Australia and generally, hard rubbish means that people leave stuff they don't want out on the street, right? Because it doesn't happen all over the world.
Picks it up,
and council comes soon and picks it up. Right?
And it's perfectly legal. Right? But in certain councils, it happens during a strict defined period of time, being a week. So you imagine the streets are littered with furniture and electronics. And so I saw that thing and connect the dots. Old console, composite cable, shit quality on the LCD, CRT downstairs, hold my beer. I'll be back. Right? And I'm bringing back a Sanyo 29-inch through the stairs, and it looked a million times better than the
straight
plasma.
off the bat. Right?
And I'm like, all right, we're onto something.
Yes,
And then I got a Sony, and then there's like a Sony
Goes-
Vega,
goes from
flat
there.
tube, and a component, all the journey, the RGB rabbit hole. Yeah, but it started like that. Yeah.
So do you remember the first CRT or arcade cabinet that really, you know, made an impression on you?
Right. Well, so there's two. I remember seeing Asterix. That was not the first. So that's later, and that's why I got this PCB here. Asterix was just such a slap in the face in a good way. We're like, what is this? It looks better than, you know, the
What
gap
have been,
between
yeah.
what you had at home, the video games at home, and the video games at the arcade felt like a decade.
Yeah.
Right? And so for me, I would have been 8 years old. We were in a trip in France, and I forget the town, but it was a carnival. So we were all dressed up with, you know, clown costumes and stuff like that, a little bit like Venice Carnival, you know. And after the fact, we went to a pub, and they had one Outrun cabinet. And I remember even the adults, my dad and his friends, they were like, they didn't care about technology and video games. Are like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, the music, and also in Europe, I'm assuming that's the same thing in Ireland, but and Australia as well. We didn't have a lot of dedicated cabinets. What we had is importers that would get the guts, the PCBs, and they would build a cabinet for cheap locally, rather than get a Sega-made, fully assembled, you know.
Yeah.
But in America, they had dedicated cabinets that look amazing. Every cabinet has a different shape, different artwork, and it just appeals. It's just cool. There's some really cool shapes in the 80s and 90s that we're doing. And with the artwork, you can really bring something visually stunning before you even know what the game is, right?
It's kind of designed in that era where you have cab after game after whatever next to each other, and they all compete, right? So you're like, I want to be in that one with the big red car, and I get to drive, and I, you know, that's.
And now, so maybe that's why it made such an impact. It's first obviously Outrun, the music, the controls. It was probably not the first driving game that I had seen, but with these high frame rate graphics and the visually stunning. But also the fact that it was all dedicated, probably with the side art, you know, the Outrun side art. I was 8 years old, I don't remember everything, but I think that's why it made such an impression. It was a dedicated guy, and then the magic of Outrun, you know.
Yes, and of course Sega. When did you start working on hardware modifications, and what was the first big project that you actually think you tackled?
I would say the first project that I finished, because I've had ambitions to tinker and interest for as long as I can remember, but never really did anything. It would be just like open a broken thing and then go, it's broken, I can't fix it. You know? But that interest was always there. But to have the means to actually do something with it and to see it through and to finish project, as we know, starting things is easy, but finishing is hard. The first big thing is the super hang-on cabinet that's off camera here. I spent a year renovating it, but
before that you were doing some mods, like you do mods and things, like you were bodging things together, making things work better. You've got cabs here that are not like straight, you know, brand new, so you would have worked on those as well, you know. What was, you know,
in retro gaming.
And so when did you start like working
right after? So it started, so back to that story with that Saturn and PC Engine. Before I was able to plug in CRT.
I think I know where you're going. Yeah, okay.
I plugged shamelessly
into the power.
Yeah, and 240 volt.
The Japanese,
Saturn, right?
Smoking.
So I look online. I can see it's a varistor and a fuse. I order the parts. The parts come 3 weeks later. They're on the side, and then one day my ex saying, "Well, you're gonna fix my console that you broke." And that was the night, the hot summer night, where I got the CRT.
Right. So you broke it first.
Fixed it. I broke it first.
I was like, we got power.
And
we
then
can go.
That, you're looking at everything. You started. At that time, the YouTube game was different, but my life in gaming was just starting, and it was so exciting. Those first few years, watching retro RGB and my life in gaming, and there was you learn so much every video that you watch. And then I did some some modding of SNES consoles, switching, installing the switches.
Yeah,
I did
for 50, 60 hertz type
50,
stuff.
60
and,
hertz, yeah. I did the Mega Drives as well. Then what I proceeded is getting all the consoles that I remembered, at least one or two, and fixing up some, repairing. And so going through all the consoles. And then after that, a few years after that, started looking at arcades. Once you have, what you're happy with console-wise and consumer CRT-wise, then looking at cabs. And all the cabs that I have some kind of modification or repair work.
So just shifting gears a little bit into more about, Loewe CRTs specifically, what do you think makes them, different to the other premium European brands like Bang & Olufsen, Grundig's, or even the more well-known brands like Sony and that sort of thing?
Right. Well, Sony, completely different.
Yeah.
Sony, that's love and hate Sony, because they used to be really the big brand of the 90s, and they were so innovative. They were so innovative back then. But as far as CRTs, I think it really depends on countries.
Yes.
And also models, but also the kind of era. I feel personally that in the 90s, especially in Australia and Asia, the Asian market, the quality has gone down a lot.
Sonys, you're talking about?
For Sonys. If you go in the 80s, the West Germany, the Japanese Sonys were really good quality. I personally feel they were over-engineered. And I'll segue back into Loewe. Convergence on Sonys is tackled by so many circuitry and so many different settings, whereas convergence on Loewe is set at a factory in with magnets inside like a plastic tube, where you don't have the rings that you have traditionally with all the other tubes. And it's not the most accurate, best convergence, BVM type convergence, but it's good enough. And guess what? 20 years later, it's still as good as day one. Whereas all the high-end Sonys I'm seeing from the same era, you have to readjust the static
consumer grade stuff.
Static convergence has moved somehow. A lot of stuff needs to be readjusted. Why? So I think Sony is a bit over-engineered. If you look at the equivalent of a VGA Loewe like this one, the one that's in there, or the one that I'm making the cards for, if you look at the Sony equivalent, it has twice the electronics inside, and they age much poorer than the Loewe do. The chassis on the Loewe is just a L-shaped chassis, and it's a lot less electronics than in a Sony. So Sony, yes, lot to say. Loewe's are those Philips tubes. Those Philips tubes are amazing. Like I said, it's a molded yoke where you have the conversions and the purity all set at the factory. They have a high TV line count for consumers. So to me, they make those TVs flirt with presentation monitor grade. So, when we talk about professional monitors, we gotta make the distinction between something that was meant to be displayed in a museum for a lot of people to enjoy, on a TV set, the big Sony TVs, those Cube PVMs, for instance. That's a presentation monitor. That was not meant to be grading Star Wars. That was meant to be displayed somewhere with bright lights and for people to see content in a very pleasing and a flattering way to the content, right? And then you have the broadcast monitors, usually the metal cases, the smaller ones, that were in dark studios and were meant to be very accurate. Not necessarily pleasing to see, but accurate. So the Loewe's, I feel, are close to the consumer grade. To the presentation monitor grade. So what makes them different from the other premium brands? Not too much, because Grundig uses the same tubes. And even Bang & Olufsen to some extent. They were plentiful in especially Melbourne, Victoria. There were some, the main importers for Australia were here in Melbourne. There were hi-fi shops. I forgot the names. I wasn't here back then, but my friends talked to me all the time about them. I think in Richmond. So it was a luxury brand. You would, just like you buy, hi-fi equipment. You don't go, to buy like a Macintosh amplifier or whatever.
Pioneer, big brands.
No, I'm talking about higher grade.
Oh,
These
okay.
brands are still in the retail stores, like
Right,
Sony and all that.
yes.
I'm talking about the brands that you don't see, audiophile equipment.
Yeah.
Not hi-fi, sorry,
Yeah.
audiophile equipment, right? Audiophile grade stuff is not being sold at Myers or, JB Hi-Fi, right? So that was that channel, and so because of that, we have a lot of them here in Victoria. So they're plentiful. That's one thing. So I was able to see a lot of different models throughout the years. I came in a little bit after when I started in the game. There was this blog, Scott Hunter, that I've quoted in one of my old videos.
I remember as well,
yeah. And so he did it in 2016, 17, 18, where there was no competition. Nobody was looking for these TVs. And he went through all of them. And I kind of came in when he started stopping a few years after that, 2017, 18, 19.
Yeah.
So the tube...
That's when you first came across the Loewe TVs.
Yeah.
Like at that point.
Yeah.
Because he highlighted certain models and certain technology within, and he's called out those specific ones because at that point people were tweaking onto RGB and SCART and those sorts of things as well. And then you kind of put two and two together and said, well, that specific brand, we're in Melbourne, we're starting to see more of them, pop up and that sort of thing.
So the first thing to mention, I guess, based on what you just said with RGB, is that even though Australia, we're in PAL land, we don't have SCART.
No.
So we got the worst of both worlds.
Yes.
No SCART and PAL.
Yes.
Right? So to have a TV that is guaranteed to give you SCART already is a plus. So that would be the first appeal back then, the first interest, right?
Yes.
Those TVs being straight imports from Japan with quite literally, in most cases, a cut plug, not the cord. They're not replacing the cord. They would cut the cord and fit it with a clip cell, which is a local electric supply brand, plug. So they'll keep the German cord and just fit an Australian plug onto it.
So how did you first come across the Loewe TVs? I think you mentioned you saw SCART Hunter's, site and that sort of thing, but how did you first come across them and start actually experimenting with them?
Right. Well, it was a friend of mine that found one on Hard Rubbish, and it had a few faults, including a chipped tube.
All right.
We brought it up the same apartment, third floor. No, it was hard being a CRT enthusiast back then. It was a show of dedication because you certainly felt CRT. And when you bring them up,
the dedication.
and when you brought them in
your joints and in your sore muscles,
and the price of it when you brought them up and then you turn it on, it's like, oh, that's a dud. Back and and back it goes on the Hard Rubbish. That wasn't fun. Anyway, so he brought it up and we put it side by side with Neo Geo, a Neo Geo AES next to my Sony flat screen Vega. Asian market, really nothing special, to be honest. I think these are very overrated here in Australia. I was just amazed at the blacks, everything about it. I was like, oh, I don't want this Vega anymore. It took me a very long time to find the equivalent model in a good one because that Loewe had different issues with geometry and stuff. But that's how I saw it. It was love at first sight of the picture.
And you started experimenting with them at that point when they weren't working quite as well. You got them working at that point?
No,
you started messing around?
No, that came
got to
much
that stage?
later. Yeah. Then with the Loewe's, you have the 68 centimeters, which have the almost flat.
Just remind me, 68 centimeter equivalent in inches?
Rest of the world, 29.
29.
America, 27.
Okay.
So Japan, Europe, Australia, we call 68.
29. Yes.
In America, they call that 27 because in America, they call viewable size.
Yes.
And the rest of the world measures tube size, including the
bit you can't see or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
I was wondering
and
about
so with a lot of Loewe's, and I don't have any of the tubes here, I love the German stuff in those Philips tubes, those high-grade Philips tubes. You have the EAK series, which is more bulbous and 68, so they call that a 28-inch, 66 centimeters. And it's not quite as sharp as these tubes at the 68, the ESF right? So our first experiment, my first Loewe that I got, the fully working one, that was a 66 centimeter, which is very good and more arcadey feel, but a little bit softer image.
Right.
And then you have the ESF, which I know you have one as well in your Kalida, E3000 chassis.
Yeah, cut
and
the
that
B-roll
is
maybe of some of that. Okay,
yeah.
carry on.
And that is a razor sharp image for a 29-inch consumer
And it was a
TV.
SCART hunter that specifically called out that model, and I went on a mission to find exactly that model because he said that this spec, this model is the one to get. And there are other similar, obviously similar models and what have you.
Well, that's an interesting point about Loewe is that Loewe, it's completely different from other electronics brand when it comes to the CRTs, because they have the planners, the Arcada, the Kalida, and so on and so forth, right?
Profile.
Contour, profile, whatever, right? And all of this is based on the case, right? But it turns out that these cases can have basically almost any of the chassis that they've done.
Yeah.
So in your case, you have a Kalida 5072.
Yes.
Right? 72 being it's the 72 centimeters, which is really the 68 centimeter tube. Tube size is super confusing. And it's an E3000 chassis, right? But you could basically have any...
E3000 Blackline, I think it was referred to?
Yeah, but Blackline is the ESF.
Yeah.
Blackline S.
Yes.
It's marketing stuff.
Yes, yes.
But what I'm trying to say is you can have a Planus with a completely different model number that inside has exactly the same guts as yours, except for the speakers, right? So I have a Planus E3000. Well, this one actually. This one over there. That's the same guts 100% as... well, 98, I guess.
Yes.
The speakers are the only difference.
Yeah.
Because it's a different case, it doesn't fit the same speakers.
My speakers are in the bottom as well. Anyway.
Well, actually, the speakers that are in yours, I have them as well, but this has more speakers.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it's a three-way. Well, there's a side story as well. This is that's kind of funny. E3000s were the cheapest Loewes. The non-100 hertz, because 100 hertz technology was what they wanted to highlight.
That was the new.
It was very expensive.
The new generation essentially was this.
So the non-100 hertz Planus, like this one, had a two-way speaker system, and if you get a 100 hertz Planus, there was an extra tweeter. So obviously, what I did is I modified the case and I stole some speakers from 100 hertz. So this is a three-way non-100 hertz Planus.
Yes.
But we forget, because nowadays every retro gaming enthusiast is looking for those non-100 hertz TVs. But if you look at the catalogs, these were the first price. Those were, I don't want to say discount, but those were the entry level Loewe. So they didn't have the nice speaker sets or all the inputs, outputs, option cards, and all of that.
Yes. So look, I know you have a lot of experience with CRTs, and included in that is you've picked up and worked on and used quite a lot of PVMs, even like Sony PVMs, even other professional grade monitors. Like I know we've spoken about JVCs and some other some other ones, but I know that you still regard and prefer Loewe consumer grade, the Loewe models that we've been speaking about so far. You regard them more and you prefer them. Compared to a PVM. So why is that?
Right. Well, this is entirely subjective, right? And after speaking to a lot of different CRT enthusiasts and kind of debating in a friendly way and trying to understand, bridging the gap, and not agreeing on why I'm not that impressed with a BVM, for instance, and they are, right? 20L5, I have no love for 20L5. I had one and I never liked it. And after really looking into it, I realized why. It was because for me, what pleases me in a picture is a vibrant colors. I like TV lines like everybody, but it doesn't have to be super, super, super razor sharp. But I want deep blacks. That's why I splurge for an OLED as my main TV, right? And those broadcast monitors, and again, not the presentation monitors, the ones that are meant to be in a studio.
Typically PVMs, BVMs, not the prosumer, ones, but the 20L5s and the similar, BVMs and whatever.
These monitors were grading tools. And the analogy that I like to use is in the audiophile world, you have studio monitors that music producers use to grade music to tune music so it's absolutely accurate, right? So they want
Want it as flat or as accurate as they
they
possibly
want the
can. They don't
flattest,
want like all the
exactly,
bass boost and all the
right.
stuff that maybe we like to hear, listen to our music. They just need to grade it. Yeah. So
And it's
yeah.
a tool. It's
Yeah.
a grading tool.
Yeah.
I see a 20L5 or even a BVM. I see them as grading tools.
Mm.
Whereas if you go, some studios have two sets of speakers. So they have your, I think the Yamaha NS10s or those black speakers of this proportion with a big white woofer, right? They use that to grade. And then what do? They put on the big ass woofers and then to get like big bass when somebody comes in and, hey, listen to the last song that we just mastered, right? You're not listening on those small studio monitors. You're listening to the big boom, boom, pleasing thing. So for me, it's the same thing. A presentation monitor or a high grade consumer is meant to be enjoyed. It's not going to be accurate. It's not going to have great geometry. It's not going to have great linearity, but it's going to be pleasing to the eye, right?
Yeah, you're kind of trading that,
right.
And I would say as well that typically a lot of PVMs, as an example, you're looking at 14-inch or below or 20 inches at most usually. Whereas, these guys, you're up there, you're heading towards 30 inches. It was designed for a living room, which is often where you want to, if you don't have them arcade cabs, you're sitting on a couch. You're sitting this far away.
Unless you have D32 money.
Yeah. Well, you've got the high-end BVM stuff, which is its own thing. But typically, when all's said and done, you have a lot of PVMs that are smaller anyway. And if you have the lights, bright lights in a room, you're looking at that. It does look a little washed out more often than not. Even if it's not an age tube, it does look a little bit washed out. These are designed for a living room. Everyday living room, right?
But some people are okay with that. So first of all, some people don't have room for a big CRT.
Yes.
I know a lot of people that 1420 is their limit. Absolutely, right?
Fair
so they like the smaller one. Then
and if you're up close, if it's on a desktop, it's clearly going to have its benefits. Yeah,
it's like, that's a very good point. It's like an OLED TV. The view distance defines also the size that you need, right?
Yeah.
So a common friend of ours, Marco Retro, that has a great YouTube channel and a series about downscaling. He loves BVMs, and through discussion, we figured out why. He really doesn't care about deep blacks. A washed out black doesn't alter his ability to enjoy the picture, but he is very pedantic about linearity. If it has bad linearity, for those who don't know what it is, bad linearity will give you, with a scrolling picture, will give you a
little bit of a wavy
and it will
thing,
wave, right? He hates that. So he's really more about, he enjoys more a picture that is really good geometry. His first famous video was about, spending hours and hours, all his experience on rebuilding and calibrating a BVM D20, or maybe not the multi-format, but a 20-inch BVM. So that's where his passion lays as far as picture quality. For me, it's the big, bright, vibrant, not necessarily accurate. So it's subjective. It depends what you like.
Yeah.
And there's room for everybody.
Yes.
And PVMs, they serve their purpose.
Yes.
But it's not the end all be all. It depends what you're looking for in the picture.
I think as well, something to be said for, you're not going to be sticking a 20-inch PVM into an arcade cab either, which, you have.
People have done it.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe
14 inches, I've seen it done.
But not these guys, but anyway.
No, not a candy, that's for sure, yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, look, moving on to some of the projects that you've had in the past, you're probably more well known for, somewhat preserving certain types of Loewe TVs, because you actually, about 2 years ago, you put out a clone card that had certain features. I typically, if I'm even was shopping around or looking for a CRT, I'd always look, be like, okay, 100 hertz. As soon as I see that, I move on, kind of keeping an eye out for scarp plugs and stuff. But 100 hertz, especially with the Loewers, you see a Z straight away, you just move on from it, right?
That's it.
Because it doesn't process 240p. If that's your goal, is to put in these consoles and have a CRT to have that era of consoles plugged in, it just misses the mark as far as that's concerned. But when did you realize that those Loewe 100 hertz TVs You know, a bit different to maybe some other 100 hertz brands or TVs that were out there.
Right. Well, is when I saw on a random, I think that's how I knew about it, or maybe I read some articles. But I remember seeing on Facebook Marketplace a Loewe with a VGA, not slot, but a VGA port, and I was like, "Wow, this is cool." And then your nerd imagination
Senses were tingling.
and go like, could it potentially bypass all the nastiness of the Z of the 100 hertz? Like what would that will allow us to do? Surely that's different from SCAD. Really, I'm curious. I want to see. And so I got that TV. It was a Q23 with a VGA card. It died shortly after. I kept the card tucked away. But then I remember putting a Dreamcast and saying, "Wow, that's amazing! Wow, that's really good." So it was the trigger was knowing that there was a VGA card, even though you rarely saw it, right?
All right, so you kind of got this sniff of a product or solution out there because Loewers had the possibility of having this VGA card. Usually, or almost exclusively, would have been in, I imagine, 100 hertz model as well. So when that led eventually to you developing an actual clone board to enable 480p inside 100 hertz television.
Yeah.
When did that project start, and what was the process like?
Right. So the motivation was like, okay, this card exists. And then I saw back then, things have changed now, but back then we're talking, I don't know, maybe 2018, that all the Z, the 100 hertz Loewers were being neglected to a point that people wouldn't even pick them up for free. And they would sit on Gumtree or, the local classifieds, marketplace, whatever, for weeks, and nobody would pick them up.
Not only that, I remember some people selling them, saying that they're great for retro gaming. And, there's plenty of people like ourselves are going, "Guy, this isn't good. You should not tell people it's good for retro."
Just because you saw one Loewe sell for a lot, that doesn't mean yours.
Yeah, they're trying to get their money for it. But anyway.
Yeah. And so then I connected the dots with the fact that, okay, there is a card that was created that transforms this useless CRT into a 31K 480p powerhouse, right? That any retro gamer would want. But I'm like, the reality is there's only, and this is just ballpark, but for every 10 of those TVs that can support this card, there's maybe one card out there. Because the process is kind of interesting. We're back to those hi-fi audiophile specialized stores. You would walk in and say, "I want to Loewe CRT." Cool. All right. You want a widescreen? You want
What
this?
color do you
that?
want or something?
Can you afford 100 hertz? Yeah, sure. Okay, 100 hertz. Do you have a PC? No. Move on. That card will never have a VGA port. If you, David, say, "Yeah, I have a PC. Would you be interested at some point to plug in your PC and a TV?" Yeah, why not? All right, I can offer you a fitment of a card, and I have some old price sheet. It will be $200-300 of the time. We can get that card fitted, and up you have a VGA input on your TV. So that was the only workflow to lead for those Loewe to have
it's a subset of a subset of a subset,
right? Only to display, and we're talking 96, 97. Who wanted to put their PCs on?
And we're talking about Melbourne too. It's not like it's like the home of Loewe TVs where everyone potentially is buying one, right? At the same time back in Europe or whatever the case is.
So then, because the numbers were so low, and I saw all these beautiful ESF tubes, these beautiful cases, just beautiful TVs, were not realizing the full potential, being useless as they were, being thrown out and thrown out and thrown out. It's like, what a waste. If we made a card, a reproduction card, we could save all these TVs and have really good TVs for every retro gaming enthusiast. So shortly after that, I realized that the schematics for this card were online. but it was still years till I managed to get it done, because Loewe basically put some misinformation out there as to how it was compatible, how it worked. So getting it to a point where I have a fully reliable plug and play kit that people can buy and have zero issues. It took a few years of testing, acquiring different TVs, testing, swapping things around, and but the schematics are there. So
yeah. So you got it together and you got it working, and you know, it was 2 years ago that you've had that going. So just remind me again, what TV and chassis do you need to look out for at the moment for this particular original board? Because yes, you have as maybe a Z series. Yes, it says it's you now know it's 100 hertz. It's a possibility, for example, that you might be able to plug this particular card in there. Was there a specific indicator on the backs of those TVs or whatever that tells you that it will work with the board that you have?
Yeah, so the card is compatible with Q24 and Q25, or in other words, Q2400 and Q2500, depends on where you look. Sometimes it's referred to as the one letter and two digits, and sometimes it's got 2 extra digits.
Yes.
Q25's got 22550 as well, which is similar.
But I've noticed as well that it doesn't just say, like in big bold writing, this is your Q25.
No, it's tiny.
It's tiny, and it's also like got numbers and letters before and after that sort of thing.
I think it starts with
we'll have to show on the
TH type 110 dot or something.
Yeah, it doesn't jump out at you exactly. You kind of have to know what you're looking for a little bit.
On my eBay store, I have photos that show, but I encourage people to contact me to make sure to have zero doubt. Please send me a picture and I'll tell you yay or nay. Loewe on the Q24 had all the options on all the Q24s. What they did for, I believe, cost savings on the Q25 is on a cheap Q25, they remove some options and some chips, and they compartmented the 3 types of Q25 chassis, which at the core is the same, but when it comes to especially the signal processing and the options and the audio inputs and all of that, they said they cut them up in 3: B for basic, M for medium, and H for high. So if you go with the 32-inch flat tube widescreen Aconda, that was one of the most expensive, and you have more than 32-inch. There's one that is 38-inch. That's the biggest Loewe I ever made, I think. Those were the Q25H, and they were compatible with DVB-T and, you know, satellite cards and all sort of stuff. The 4x3 TVs, which again now are more desirable, they were the lower end. So these had
kind of on its way out. We were moving on to widescreen, right?
Yeah. So those were Q25B. Now, in the official Loewe documentation about the VGA card, it says that the VGA card is compatible with Q25B. And this was a massive, massive red herring for me. I can't count the hours. I wasted months on this because I had the manual that said compatible with Q25B, and Q25B now I know is not only missing the internal connector, but it's missing circuitry. It's on the signal board as well. So you cannot plug in a VGA card on the Q25.
Original or clone or otherwise, it just won't work.
None at all.
Just there's 3 kinds. So the basic one, no, but the other 2, you're okay. It was a medium and
M and H, no problem.
M and H, no problem.
Yeah.
And then so that's the Q25, and the Q24s, it's all of them at that point. Yeah, in this side. So it's been out for 2 years, and I've actually took a peek at some of your feedback as well that you've received. And, you know, it's all, you know, very interesting and positive, like that I've seen on there, you know, people thanking you and people from kind of all over the place, you know, random places in Europe and Australia. You know, what have you found? What has the feedback been like? And can you kind of talk to, you know, you've had to make these boards bespoke yourself, get them produced yourself. You know, failure rate. You know, have you had any, you know, bad stories to tell? Like, what has it been like?
Yeah, so first of all, you're right. I've been blessed. I'm so happy to see this feedback is really gratifying. To see that people are happy. There's a lot of passion and nostalgia behind it, right? So you're not selling tomatoes, you're selling you're selling very specific things that people are wanting. I've been blessed by great feedback and also reliability. So the challenge, like I said, the card itself, the schematics are there. I'm not an electronics engineer. I didn't design this card. The schematics are available. If you don't want to buy a card from me, you can just build one yourself. There's no problem. Solder a couple wires, you'll get VGA. If you want to DIY it, there's no problem. What I provide is a plug and play kit with support. If you don't want to start looking into this and doing something hacky, you have an option. But really what I provided is getting the right cables. That was actually harder than designing the card. Cost wise and complexity wise is getting the right internal cable. That was the biggest hurdle. As far as so that was the biggest challenge to get the card going, is to get it into the form of a kit that can be manufactured with modern technologies and that is reliable. As far as reliability, it's a very simple circuit and I get the cables made professionally. I started soldering it myself and I quickly realized it wasn't scalable, and you can easily make a manual mistake with one of the pins, and because I sell them all across the globe, especially in Europe, I don't want to have to troubleshoot that of having to resend, and people have a bad experience because of badly crimped cable, So I got them made professionally, and so far zero returns, zero issues that were related to the card itself. People had a couple of issues installing or that were due to their TVs, but no return, touch wood.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty cool. So obviously you're always keeping an eye on the secondhand marketplaces and things like that for these, so have you noticed, as the word kind of gotten out there in the past 2 years, that now, even the Zeds, which were once very, maligned, you'd be like, I wouldn't even touch a Z or look at a Z, swipe over, show me something proper. Are they, more desirable now? Are they 100%. Selling for more because they are more desirable, because you can resurrect them as a 480p CRT effectively?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple factors. The VGA card most likely had an impact on that. People know, and I know some people in local groups and some friends that are looking for a card for a TV that they can fit a card to. There was no longer than yesterday, there was a guy looking for one on one of the local groups. Look, the world has changed when it comes to CRT, in general, but of course with CRTs. So people are grabbing pretty much everything now, and everything Loewe now is compatible. Even to some extent, the Zs that are not VGA compatible, if there's one for $50, people are going to grab that.
What's the difference between 50 and like immediately $300 and up, for a TV? Yeah.
But I have a story where when just before I released the card, and I had a few myself, and I was modifying them myself because I wanted to do it locally first before sending the card. I wanted to be able to get a set, fit one of my cards in, do some testing for a few days, make sure that everything is good, do local transport, see that nothing fails in transport, see how reliable it was. And so I sold a couple first like that, right? And they were mostly 4x3, which those sold already then pretty well. But then one day I had a 32-inch Planus curved screen. I fit an RGB card. I tried to sell it for 200 AUD, which is, 100 something euros, 100 something USD. And it sat there with zero interest for weeks and weeks and weeks. In the end, I had to take off the card and sell it for $15 or something like that.
Because all anyone would have seen at that stage is, again, it's a Z series, move on. They didn't even register in their heads that there wasn't even an option to make it.
Well, I mentioned it.
Yeah.
And I showcased it with beautiful VGA
But I think the
inputs.
stigma was there, right?
The stigma was there.
Yes.
I don't know how much of the And now people are paying that without the card and then buying the card from me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so it's definitely shifted. 2 years has made a lot of difference,
yeah.
and the word has definitely gone out there. Great. So we're talking about, the CRTs. They're 480p. Typically, people want 240p for a specific reason. So you're preserving and resurrecting these TVs to give them a new lease of life as a 480p TV. What was the typical primary use case that you had for those TVs to begin with?
The 480p one?
Yeah, the 480p.
Personally,
You got a card in there now.
Yeah.
You now have a TV that's no longer kind of this 100 hertz garbage,
Right.
and it's now usable 480p. What was the main kind of use case?
For me, Dreamcast.
Yep.
Because Dreamcast also has a tie-in with arcade, Naomi
Yes.
games.
Yes.
So
many really good arcade, accurate, even
Right.
2D fighters and Capcom ones, and
Dreamcast is cheap, and
Yeah.
you put in a GDMU in there, just off you go, SD card.
and the picture's just so good on a 480p option, on a screen.
Yeah.
It's so good.
So that's for me. A lot of my customers have a widescreen TVs. I've noticed the Aconda and Articos and those wider ones. Those larger ones with widescreen. Sorry, usually you don't. Loewe has one model that's super cute with a Q25B, and I managed to modify that by harvesting a H card, but I call it the baby Loewe, and it's a 22-inch widescreen.
Widescreen,
CRT.
yeah, okay.
So it's like a PC monitor. It's ridiculous. It's
so cool.
awesome.
So that's cool. So we have the Dreamcast, but obviously there's a lot of sort of that 240p console of that era. You have GameCubes, you even have Wii's to a certain extent as well. The Dreamcast and maybe some others I can't think of off the top of my head. Straight up 480p content into the TV, maybe even like some PCs and stuff like that. The computers.
Again, it depends if you have a widescreen or
Yes.
a 4x3
Or
Loewe. The widescreen Loewe, unfortunately, the implementation of VGA on these chassis is good and very good in some regards. You have a VGA geometry menu that's really practical. It essentially transforms into a monitor. PC monitors, the CRT monitors of the day, you had all these geometry settings right on the front, right? So it's the same thing that it does because it was meant for PCs. What is not so elegant is there's no widescreen 4x3 mode. So if you have a widescreen CRT and you input a 4x3 resolution, you'll see artifacts on the side and you'll kind of have to resize it manually.
Yeah.
So to make sure that you have a 4x3 image, you'll have either to measure or wing it. So it's not super elegant like that. So really, whether you have a 4x3 Loewe or widescreen Loewe is really going to define what your use case are going to be. If you're a widescreen Loewe, Xbox 360, 848 by 480, wonderful resolution. Daytona, USA on this.
Yeah, so
good.
So then you have some out of the box use cases as well. I think I was talking to you before we got recording as well. So it's not that big a step to get your 240p signal or content and line double it. So you effectively, and then you might have like, if you still want scan lines and that, you can still apply the scan line. But there's a lot of devices that line double like that, like your GBSC and some maybe a RetroThinks or 2Xs, things like that. But it's not that hard. You won't get virtually any lag. But you also then have a whole slew of 240p level signals and consoles that you can still use on a CRT TV. So there's a bit more of a broader use case there as well. And if you were someone like our friend Marco, he would get everything that's more modern potentially and then downscale it down to that. So it's kind of like a good middle ground without being a multi-format monitor. There's a lot of ways of getting the most out of it. If you only want one CRT, and you had one of these, you could get a lot of use case out of it. So just last but not least, I guess, if this is news to someone and they actually have found a Z Series 100 Hertz Loewe, how do they get a hold of one of these cards?
There's an eBay store. And if you type Loewe VGA on Google, you'll see my video or the retro RGB post that has.
What I'll do is I'll just for anyone watching this video, I'll put a link in the description directly to the eBay page if you like as well. And you have you'll find it obviously if you search in other places as well, because 2 years ago you've released there was some videos on
Yeah,
it.
and there's not a lot of stuff around Loewe VGA anyway. So
Yeah.
if you type Loewe VGA in any search engine, it'll probably lead you through it, or even through eBay. Just if you, because what happened since day one that I sold it is that some eBay listing expired because I ran out of cards, or the quantity got hit zero, even though I had more. And so I had to relist it, and
Right.
so it becomes a new listing, and so the old listing link doesn't
So
work.
the SEO maybe dies off or something like that. Anyway,
So
it just makes you have to start from
what
scratch.
that means is that the eBay link on YouTube or on Retro RGB's
Right.
article then doesn't work
Dies.
anymore, right?
Yeah.
But if you just go on eBay and type Loewe VGA, you'll find it.
You'll find it on there. Now, this original card that we've been talking about so far, we've mentioned that it only works on quite a lot of 100Hz TVs, but the Q24 and the Q25s. There are older series TVs. The Q23, is that essentially where it lands as far as the 100Hz TVs are concerned? So up until now, certainly that card is not going to work for those
Right.
at this stage. And, part of the reason we're even getting together today is that you've been working busy behind the scenes to develop another card, right?
Yeah, for the Q23.
For the Q23. So effectively, it's now official. You've finished developing this particular card,
Yeah.
and you are, essentially ready to be able to sell these cards to
Almost.
users with a Q23. Almost, yes. So can you show us? Can you show us this card?
Sure, yeah. I can show you a couple of things. I want to kind of maybe talk about the difference.
What's different about this version?
Right.
Can you show us like a bit of old, bit of new, and how you got to this?
So as you said, Q23 is older. There are other 100Hz chassis on Loewe. There's many of them: Q21, Q22, Q44, 41, 41.4. There's heaps.
Right.
The only other chassis that I'm aware has an official VGA card for, even though it's not really documented. It's more because I found it, like you were asking earlier. I actually found a Q23 TV years ago with a VGA card, is the Q23. So I focused on that, but there's unfortunately still 100Hz TVs at their chassis that don't support VGA. So yeah, it's an older chassis, like you said. And as far as picture quality, it's going to be identical as the Q24. As far as functionality, there's a little bit of differences, which I'll get into. But from an implementation perspective, it's quite a bit different. Now, I'll start with this. This is the Q24 reproduction card. And while it's a bit different to the original card, it's very similar in the way it fits. So you have a plastic I/O board where you have your SCART connectors and so on and so forth. You have a little cutout for VGA, which you will snip with flush cutters. And then you slide in the plastic tray, you slide your card, and then you have one connector that goes to the signal board. Boom. That's the installation. Of course, you have to turn it on in the service menu, but it's very simple, right? So it's a very sturdy implementation from a physical perspective, because you are plugging it straight into the card, and then you have one connector to the signal board. Now, I want to show, this is the 100% original Loewe VGA card. It also has some kind of infrared display, I forgot, or it could be a rotation module. Anyway, it's something that is not used for us. So I didn't replicate that part of the circuitry. The top part here, there's a line in between. What I've replicated is this bit.
Right.
So you have this square card with connectors on both sides. And this is where, I don't know what Loewe was thinking, but it really looks like an afterthought. So the card was mounted on this plastic bracket, and that was mounted on the neck. So essentially the card is sitting in the middle of the TV, right under the neck, and has a connector on one side. This is all original, again, this is all from factory Loewe. And so you'd have that connector, that red connector sits, or it was this side, but similar. Yeah. And then you have this proprietary, I want to say proprietary VGA cable, VGA connector that has threads into it, and that can mount. Now, normal VGA connectors can't mount the same way. And you also have this kind of strain relief, and see how it's bent here? That's actually how it was.
It's like a proprietary bend in the cable.
Yeah, and basically there's no clearance in the TV.
In the TV
you have a
itself.
signal board here, so you can't. I don't know why they put it there. Why they had a circuit behind that when there was room elsewhere to put it. And so on the I/O board, you don't have a slot for the card, just like you do with this one. Then you have audio, and you have this cable also that doesn't go in the card, that screws with a mounting screw into a little hole on the I/O plate, and then you have to connect this to a connector on the signal board. And then obviously you have the cable that goes from the card to the signal board. So that complicates everything.
So that's 3 cables coming off the one set of cards effectively going to all different parts of the TV.
And
that's the original
design.
And and so they're, starts with the thing hanging in somewhere in the middle of your TV, and then going off in different directions to the rear of the TV, and then to different signal boards inside the television as well. Yeah,
it's not elegant at all, for lack of a better word. So replicating this, I've took 2 liberties. One is to design a card so it fits in the I/O plate, so this plastic plate that every Loewe has.
Oh yeah.
There is a slot for a satellite card, and I made the executive decision that I don't think anybody would need both the satellite card and the VGA card. If you are a potential customer and you want your satellite card, please beware, you're gonna have to make a choice.
Yes.
Because then I can have the same kind of mounting that I did with this card, is it slots, and it makes for less runs of cables as well, right? That was my thought process on this. Not that this is impossible to do. It's not that hard. Maybe the what's the name? The tightening bracket, metal bracket. Maybe that would have been harder. But getting a bracket like this to fit on the neck is not hard. But then I'd have to tell customers to remove the neck board, and it's just why? It's too much.
Yes.
And it doesn't add anything to it.
Yes.
Especially if we all agree that satellite cards are not used anymore, right? So we can use that slot. It's much more elegant. That's the first difference. The second difference is to circumvent this fairly proprietary cable with a bend here, and these wires kind of take the bend. But if you have a proper VGA cable, a shielded one, and you try to bend it, or it's just not, it's not very good for reliability. So I made this little breakout board that the signal board where there's blockage stops around here. So there's clearance here for this cable, but there's no clearance behind this particular connector. So this PCB, I'm getting them assembled professionally.
Yep.
So again, there's less room for anything. Look, you can make cables manually, but there's always a bit of room for error.
Yeah.
Where, yes, that's why I want everything done professionally. So yeah, that's the new card. It sits in the satellite slot. That's the pre-production run.
Yes.
The card will be exactly the same, but what I mean by pre-production run is I've made these cables by hand. They look close to identical to no, sorry, these two. These two made them for 5 kits that, you know, I've already sold to 2 customers. But I'm waiting to have the professionally made cables. These were made using old Loewe parts. So these are harvested cables that are modified to fit the purpose, but we will have soon. I'm still waiting for the cables. Once the cables arrive, I will make probably a video demonstrating the quirk. So I was saying that one of the differences with the Q23 card is that it doesn't have a dedicated VGA channel. And by channel, I mean AV. It does have a channel, but it's channel 196. And you need to know that. And the quirkiness about that, that's probably the worst bit, is that on the Q24-25, you're on VGA, it's going to give you a blue screen. And if you have no input, it's going to stay there until you put an input. On the Q23, that's the one thing that makes it a little bit inferior, I would say. It's not a deal breaker, but you select channel 196. If there's no VGA input, it's gonna display, how you call it, snow, which is weird because the tuner is not on, but it displays snow, I believe. And then after 5 to 10 seconds, it defaults to the last channel that you use. So if you turn on the TV and you haven't turned on your console yet, you're gonna have to re-enter 196.
Yeah.
So that's the one quirk. It still has a geometry menu, although we have found so far one TV that doesn't have a geometry menu. Everything works on it, but it doesn't have a geometry menu. So I'm still trying to figure out what are the parameters of that. Is it a firmware? I don't think it's a firmware. It could be the settings chip. I'm doing some testing, but I'll try and alert potential buyers of all the potential quirks.
So over the last couple of years then, you've had the card available to get the Q24 and 25 TVs working as VGA with 480p signals. So you must have been approached over that journey about, people, from people with the Q23, right? So, would many people actually have approached you about this over that time, or have they reached out and have they been waiting, at this point?
Some of them, and some of them I reached out to already. It's about 10, I think, not that many.
Yes.
I'm hoping that people didn't reach out because they read
24, 25, I'm not in this, it's not going to happen sort of thing.
And they didn't bother to ask because they're like, no, the card is clearly for Q24, 25, so I'm not going to buy that model. Look, one good thing about Q23 is for people, for 4x3 lovers, is that Q23 is an older model and most of the Q23s are 4x3.
4x3, yeah, okay.
Right,
yeah.
Whereas that's the opposite, especially when you talk about Q25. Q25B is often 4x3, which is a no-go, and then you get Q25M and H. The vast majority of M and H Q25s are widescreen.
Widescreen anyway.
So for the 4x3 lovers, it does open the doors for more 4x3 VGA.
So you've had a few pre-production boards knocking around. You've had at least 1 or 2 people install them and try them out at this stage. And you said they're almost ready for release. So where are we at? What's the sort of timing and what can we expect?
The cables.
Yes.
So the problem is the cables. I work with a company. That's all they do. And they're really good at it, and they do technical drawings that makes a nerd drool, or at least me, with just how long the heat shrink is and just all the technical details of what you have in your mind, what you want. You tell them exactly what you want, and they'll draw it in a really nice schematic kind of drawing. So that's ongoing. They haven't completed the production yet.
Okay.
And after that, they'll have to ship it.
You'll have your first batch effectively of cables, and you already have all the other parts as far as
All
the boards and everything are concerned.
Yeah.
So what's your rough guess as to when those cables will be here and when people you'll start listing it, right? So you haven't started listing it yet.
No.
available for purchase. So
So it's going to be a bit of a race with how long you're going to take to edit the video as well. So I don't know which one will come first. I think what's going to happen for me is I'll need to do a presentation video to show a bit of everything. Just so people are equipped with all the facts, right?
Yes.
Because I need to talk about the installation process, the pros and cons, everything. And then get those cables. I have pretty much everything else that I need to be able to ship them. So I'm hoping within a month of now.
So it's right now, it's the beginning of April. So maybe by the beginning of May, by the time you're watching this video, maybe I'll have, won't have released it until about that time anyway. And you'll have it available for sale like the other card on an eBay listing effectively. So if by the time you're watching this video, if it is genuinely released, we'll make sure there's some links at the bottom there, so you know what to look for, and I'll label one the original board with for Q2425, and this is the new board for the Q23. So I think it's been a long road as well. So congratulations on getting there. A lot of work I know has gone into it behind the scenes, and you're nearly there, right? So
I want to give props to Murray, who's a very talented electrical engineer.
Masmars, I think. Masmars is his online
He's
tag.
He's known online for lots of different things.
Yes.
He was on
a lot of retro gaming, or retro community
core building
and things like that. Yeah. So actually responsible for some of the cores, the first cores that have arrived on the Analog Pocket, like the Neo Geo and things like that.
PC Engine CD
possibly.
as well.
I don't remember all the different ones, but
Neo Geo I remember. So he's local to us, even though he's like us, imported goods from New Zealand. And he came in with his big brain and helped me iron out an issue that had been stopping this from being possible for a very long time. And he came, I bought a nice oscilloscope, and I don't know how to use it yet, but he came.
But he did.
Was like, your issue is this. He reverse engineered the whole circuit.
But you had eliminated virtually every possibility. You got to a certain point, and it was just this one specific
and I could have found it.
You needed his help.
I could have found it by just being diligent and going through it 10 times.
But as you said before, you're not an electrical engineer.
By like without, just by how you call it, ruling it out by just saying, that's the wrong value, I made a mistake here. Anybody can do that, right? Just if you're diligent enough and you're observant enough. But watching him doing it, he didn't do that at all. He literally poked the circuit, explaining to me what that does, and why that's wrong, and that's that cap because you don't have enough capacitance, and therefore the waveform doesn't look right. Here it should look like this, and on yours it look like this. And that was amazing to watch.
So bottom line, we now have a whole new bunch of CRT TVs that will potentially be preserved thanks to this board. So thank you for that contribution to our community, to the community at large, and look out for that soon, as far as that's concerned. So we will potentially break this into a couple of parts, because this is going for a very long time. So thank you for everyone that's sticking with us. But there's actually more other interesting things that I want to talk to Ludo about, aside from the CRT specifically and VGA cards and so on and so forth. So we thank you for watching so far, if you've gotten this far, and we'll see you in the next one. That's going to wrap up part 1 of our conversation with Ludo. I hope you've enjoyed his deep dive into CRT technology, Loewe TVs, and his innovative VGA clone cards that are giving these once overlooked displays a second life. In part 2, we'll shift gears to explore Ludo's other passion projects, including his impressive Sega arcade cabinet collection and restorations. If you've enjoyed this technical discussion about CRTs, you won't want to miss the arcade restoration stories coming up next. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss part 2 when it drops. As always, thanks for watching. If you found this information helpful, especially about the Loewe VGA cards, give the video a like and drop a comment with any questions for Ludo. I'll make sure to include links to find more information about his VGA clone cards in the description below. See you in part 2.